Welcome back to Forensic Myth Monday, the series where we take the things you have seen in crime shows, heard in crime stories, or simply believed about forensic science and put them to the test. Today we are talking about something that most people would probably rather not see at a crime scene: maggots. Yes, those tiny wriggling larvae that appear around decomposing remains. But here's the strange part to a forensic scientist. Maggots are not simply something disgusting found on a body, they can actually become evidence. And that leads us to today's question: can maggots really tell investigators when someone died? You may have seen this in crime shows. Investigators arrive at a scene, examine the insects on a body, and suddenly someone announces the victim has been dead for approximately 3 days. It sounds incredibly precise, but is that actually how forensic entomology works? Let's find out. Let's first understand what we are actually talking about. Forensic entomology is the application of the study of insects and other arthropods to legal investigation, and one of its most fascinating application is in death investigations. When a body is left exposed after death, the decomposition process begins, and as decomposition progresses, it can attract different insects. Some of the earliest visitors can be flies, and this is where our tiny forensic investigators enter the story. Certain flies are attracted to the chemical released during decomposition. They may arrive at the remains, lay eggs, and eventually those eggs hatch into larvae. Those larvae are what we commonly call maggots. And here's where things become scientifically fascinating. A maggot is not simply a maggot, it is part of developmental process. The insect goes through different stages of development depending on the species, the environment, and the available food source. Its development follows a predictable biological pattern. For example, a fly may lay eggs, those eggs hatch into larvae. The larvae pass through different developmental stages, eventually becoming pupae and finally emerging as adult flies. So, why does that matter to forensic investigators? Because development takes time. If investigators can determine what species of insect is present and identify its developmental stage, they may be able to estimate how long the insects have been developing, and that information can potentially help investigators estimate the postmortem interval or PMI. In simple words, the postmortem interval is an estimate of the amount of time that has passed since death. But here's where we need to stop and destroy one of the biggest myths. Maggots do not have a built-in clock that tells scientists the exact time of death. You cannot simply look at a maggot, measure it, and say, "Ah yes, this person died exactly 72 hours ago." Real forensic science is much more complicated. Think about it this way. Imagine you plant a seed. You know that the seed develops through different stages, but its growth is not controlled by time alone. Temperature matters, water matters, sunlight matters, the environment matters. Insects are also similar. Their development is affected by environmental conditions, especially the temperature. A warmer environment can accelerate insect development, while cooler conditions can slow it down. And that means forensic entomologists need much more information than simply looking at the insects. They may need to consider the species of insect, developmental stage, temperature history, environmental conditions, location of the remains, and other circumstances surrounding the scene. This is one reason why forensic entomology is a science of careful interpretation, not magical prediction. Now let's imagine a hypothetical crime scene. Investigators discover human remains outdoors. There are numerous insects around the body. Samples are carefully collected. The investigators don't simply scoop up a handful of maggots and throw them into a container. Different insect specimens may need to be collected, preserved, documented, and examined. Some larvae may be collected alive so that they can continue developing under controlled laboratory conditions. Why? Because sometimes watching how an insect develops can help experts identify its species and better understand its developmental stage. The species itself is important. Different insect species have different developmental patterns and may arrive at remains at different stages of decomposition. So, identifying the insect correctly can be an important part of the investigation. And here's another fascinating concept. Insects don't necessarily arrive at a body at the exact moment of death. That sounds obvious, but it has huge forensic importance. Suppose someone dies inside a sealed room, insects may not be able to reach the remains immediately. Or imagine a body is initially buried and later exposed. The insect activity may tell investigators something about the period during which the remains were accessible to insect, not necessarily the exact moment when death occurred. This is why forensic entomology is generally used alongside other evidence rather than as a magical standalone answer. Now let's go one step deeper. Forensic entomology can involve two broad ideas that are particularly important in death investigation. The first is development based estimation. Here, scientists examine the age or development stage of insects found on the remains. For example, if a particular insect is known to develop from an egg to a certain larvae stage, under particular temperature conditions over a particular period, scientists can use that biological information to help estimate the time involved. The second involves insect succession. As decomposition progresses, the insect community associated with the remains can change. Different insects may appear at different stages of decomposition. So instead of looking only at one maggot, investigators may consider the broader insect community and the stage of decomposition. It's almost like the crime scene has its own biological timeline. But remember, the word we keep coming back to is estimate, not certainty, not an exact timestamp, an estimate. And that distinction is extremely important because real crime scenes are messy. Nature doesn't follow a perfectly controlled laboratory experiment. Bodies can be indoors or outdoors. They can be exposed to sunlight or shade. They can be covered by clothing. They can be submerged. They can be buried. They can be inside vehicles or buildings. Weather can change. Temperature can fluctuate. Animals can disturb remains. Insects can have limited access. And all of these factors can influence what forensic investigator observes. So when a television detective says the maggots are 3 days old, therefore the victim died at exactly 9 p.m. 3 days ago, that is a dramatic television moment. But real forensic science usually doesn't work with that kind of absolute certainty. Instead, scientists work with biological evidence, environmental information, established developmental data, and the circumstances of the case to produce a scientifically supported estimate. And there's another important point. The presence of insects can sometimes tell investigators more than simply how long. It may help provide information about the circumstances surrounding decomposition and access to the remains. In some investigation, insect evidence can even help raise questions about whether remains were moved from one location to another. Again, insects are not solving the entire case. They are contributing another piece to the puzzle. And that is what makes forensic science so fascinating. A tiny organism that most people would instinctively ignore or even find disgusting can become a meaningful piece of evidence. Now let's return to our original question. Can maggots really tell when someone died? The answer is partly true. Maggots and other insects associated with decomposing remains can provide valuable information that may help forensic experts estimate the post-mortem interval, but they cannot simply give investigators an exact time of death. The estimate depends on many factors, including insect species, developmental stage, temperature, environmental condition, insect access to the remains, and the circumstances of the scene. So the next time you watch a crime documentary and see an investigator examining a mass of maggots, don't just think that's disgusting. Think about what those insects are actually telling the scientists. They are living organisms following biological processes, and those processes can leave behind a timeline, not a perfect timeline, not a magical timestamp, but potentially a very valuable forensic clue. And that is the fascinating world of forensic entomology. Sometimes smallest creature at a crime scene can help answer some of the biggest questions. So myth busted, partly true. Maggots can help forensic scientists estimate the time since death, but they cannot tell you the exact moments when someone died. And that difference between exactly when and approximately when is where real forensic science separates itself from television. If you enjoy discovering the science behind this unusual forensic clue, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next episode of Forensic Myth Monday, because every Monday we are taking another popular forensic belief and putting it under the microscope. Until next time, stay curious, question the evidence, and remember, where science meets crime.